At the age of 65, actor Val Kilmer passed away. He was known for his roles as Batman, Jim Morrison, and the protagonist in Top Gun. Everyone in Hollywood paused to remember Val Kilmer, who embodied every role he played, from Doc Holliday to Jim Morrison. After hearing the tragic news of his death, Kilmer embodied his roles rather than merely portraying them. Some portion, however, has always seemed distinct, distant, and unbeatable. The truth about Batman Forever, which Val Kilmer finally revealed to everyone just before he passed away, was not what anyone had anticipated. Perhaps the naysayers weren't to blame. Not because of the pressure, he listened when instructed to maintain secrecy. His burden, which he bore silently, was heavy. "They made me hide this," he whispered to a friend while they were out. The story revolved around a dream that ended up in prison and the hidden cost of becoming world champion. One of the first indicators was the bat suit. Nobody remembered this Batman, but he was here. In the mid-1990s, Gotham was experiencing some changes. After Batman Returns, Michael Keaton famously hung up his cape, abandoning a series that was rapidly veering off course. Also stepping back was director Tim Burton. A fresh, more visually appealing, commercially viable, and kid-friendly concept was what Warner Brothers were seeking. More vibrant colors, more outrageous villains, and a new Dark Knight were all introduced when Joel Schumacher took over. The choice of Val Kilmer was murky. For the most part, nobody even noticed him. However, in order to appeal to a younger audience and convey Bruce Wayne's complex emotions, Warner Bros. Needed a leading man with exceptional acting abilities. Kilmer, fresh off his successes in Tombstone and The Doors, possessed the ideal blend of charisma and toughness. Still, playing Batman wasn't like any other job. Kilmer drew inspiration from Keaton, who portrayed a beloved, enigmatic, and timid character. Warner Brothers made it plain that the film's impact was just as important as its box office performance. They were in need of a Batman who could hawk fast food, movies, and toys. Now that he was the public face of a multi-billion-dollar advertising campaign, Kilmer was more than just an actor. Behind the scenes, Kilmer worked tirelessly. Because of his admiration for Schumacher and their previous collaboration on The Saint, 1997, he consented to play the role without having read the script. Kilmer poured his heart and soul into the part, just like a Shakespearean protagonist. He was interested in exploring Bruce Wayne's dual personas, the symbol and the millionaire kid, but he soon realized that there was more of an emphasis on showing off and less on passing judgment. Batman was more of a symbol than a real person to the film studio. Despite this, Batman Forever still managed to pull in a massive audience. Warner Brothers reaped the benefits as it earned over $300 million, 0 cents, globally, and reignited fan interest in the franchise. Kilmer had completed his task. He stepped into the role, delivered the lines, and contributed to the success of the film. Being successful isn't necessarily indicative of everything, though. Kilmer never let the interviewees and cameras see how he felt stifled by the role. Not against bad guys or stunts, but against silence, discomfort, and the constant sense of being erased. Every day on set became a battle. Since the part required a suit, it was clear that something was amiss. Behind the hood, there is a hidden truth. As a child, Val Kilmer looked up to superheroes, so donning the Batsuit seemed like a sign of triumph. For him, it was more than just a dream. It felt like a complete circle had been completed at that very moment. For many, it was an opportunity to fulfill a lifelong ambition. When he first laid eyes on the iconic suit, shimmering in the studio lights, he reverted to his childhood self. Strong, amazed, and proud he was. However, its duration was brief. The moment he put it on, everything changed. Beautiful to look at, but hideous to wear, the suit was designed to stand out and add a cinematic flair. Immediately, it transformed Kilmer from a performer into a captive. It weighed over 50 pounds and was constructed of thick, hard rubber. Because of the hood, he had trouble turning his head. Because of the chest plate, he had trouble breathing. Walking became a chore due to the boots. The lack of ventilation in the suit caused him to overheat and perspire profusely. By midday, he was drenched and exhausted. His inability to hear or speak clearly was the most frustrating aspect. People began to ignore him shortly after, which, he later reflected, left him feeling extremely lonely. Looking back, he compared it to playing in a tomb. Kilmer usually gives 110% in his roles, but he failed miserably this time around. He was unable to express himself verbally, facially, or with his body. He could only make stiff movements and strange gestures. No matter how hard he tried to embody Bruce Wayne, the suit that was meant to define him only served to crush him. No one on set seemed to notice. After seeing the ensemble in action, the crew approved. The form was appealing to the designers. Warner Brothers was ecstatic about the movie's potential box office take. Various items, including lunchboxes, signs, and cereal boxes, featured Batman. The photo of Kilmer in the suit quickly gained international attention. However, the man inside remains invisible. The one instance that hurt more than anything else would remain with him forever. On one particular afternoon, the renowned business magnate Warren Buffett brought his grandkids to see the show. BuzzFeed was a huge deal even in Hollywood, so naturally everyone was overjoyed. Standing tall in his Batman costume, Kilmer was prepared to meet them. When they arrived, the children were overjoyed. Fleeing toward him, they were all wide-eyed and shouting, but he had the impression that something was wrong with him. They weren't addressing me, Kilmer recalled in retrospect. Someone was chatting with the suit. The children ran up to him, their mouths hanging open in astonishment as they touched and tapped the bat symbol on his utility belt and gazed in awe at his armor. But they never once looked him in the eyes, said hello, asked any questions, or spoke to Val, all of whom were speaking to Batman. And that was when it hit him. He wasn't acting like Batman, he was just dressed as Batman. He tried so hard to bring soul to the part, but nothing ever made it to screen. His performance would never be about nuance, emotion, or being difficult to understand. It would revolve around camera angles, blocking, and positioning. He went from playing a real person to a spoiled brat. I realized I was just an actor in a suit, nothing more, he said. What a drag. Until he discovered that the only thing he needed to do for the film was turn up and do as directed. The physical demands were immense, but the emotional toll was much greater. After long days of filming, he would return home with aching shoulders, raw skin, and ringing ears from overexposure to speech. He had difficulty breathing. Kilmer confided in his family, "They made me hide this as he was nearing the end of his life. They told me not to talk about it, not to tell people how I really felt because it would ruin the illusion. The part was very constrained and he didn't speak much." Deals were signed and promotions were planned. Warner Brothers made it clear that Batman had a job to do. He had to look unbreakable and perfect. He smiled when we spoke, proudly putting his name on the toys, but he was crumbling on the inside. The weight of the suit had hurt him more than just physically. It had broken a piece of his heart. I used to think being Batman would be like flying. It was shiny and could sell, but it cost something, and Kilmer had to pay for it himself. He turned down the opportunity to make Batman and Robin 2, not out of pride or malice, but because he couldn't bear to be that silent hero again. He had always wanted to play Batman, and once he did, he couldn't wait to get away from the role. How a dream crumbled. People thought Batman Forever was a fantastic return for The Dark Knight. It was a huge financial success, earning over $330 million, 0 cents, worldwide. Many fans came out. The theaters were packed with energy. At the end of the filming, children were begging for Batman toys. Warner Brothers threw a party, which the film's director Joel Schumacher enjoyed for its campiness and neon lights. Suddenly, Val Kilmer, clad in the most recognizable superhero suit in the world, was everywhere. However, Kilmer didn't feel accomplished. He was supposed to be happy and satisfied, having reached the peak, left a legacy, and lived the dream. Every child who had a picture book had fun, but every night he would look at himself in the hotel mirror and wonder why he felt so empty. Kilmer didn't feel like a hero. Instead, he was like a man yelling in a room full of silence. His voice was muted beneath layers of molded foam and studio standards. He was disappearing behind the scenes, but everyone else saw him as Batman. The part that had offered him so much had taken everything away from him. It wasn't just the weight of the suit, though. It was the transformation in his mind that kept him awake at night. Batman has always stood for strength, mystery, and toughness. Meanwhile, Kilmer felt trapped, confined, and invisible while playing the role. Things weren't always going well in the world. There was a lot of pressure. People thought he would fill Michael Keaton's shoes, win over a dedicated fan base, and satisfy a profit-driven studio. Every action, every smile was scrutinized. He couldn't even express how the suit or the part made him feel without being criticized, so he remained silent. Once again, though, being quiet has its price. After he stopped looking forward to becoming the superhero and started dreading every day of shooting, Kilmer began to dislike the thing he had wanted before, the suit. It didn't make him stronger. It took away the art he loved. He was no longer allowed to be spontaneous, open, or willing to act. Every word and phrase was hidden. Scenes were planned around how the outfit moved instead of how he moved. Kilmer wasn't asked to be Batman just to look like him. The thing he did was typical of an expert. He persisted. Nevertheless, he departed Gotham with a heavy heart after the show ended. Rumors of a sequel titled Batman and Robin were spreading. The studio wanted him back. Kilmer had a quiet and complete breakup on the inside. He wasn't angry or mad, but he was exhausted. He shocked Hollywood with that decision and refused to return. The official reason given to the press was a clash of schedules, which was a tidy, vague excuse that covered up the truth. Behind closed doors, Kilmer had vowed to himself that he would never again let his appearance dictate who he was. The event had changed him, but not in the way that fame should have changed him. Instead, it had darker, scarier effects. After that, he dropped hints in his appearances. "I didn't quit Batman," he said once. "Batman left me." For a long time, he would not discuss it. Moving forward with other endeavors, some of which were successful and others of which were not, he rediscovers his passion for the stage and narrating stories in his unique style. The shadow of the Batsuit, however, remained. Even at airports where he would still be called Batman, it accompanied him to interviews and fan mail. A pleasant smile would grace his face. As usual, he did. But the part had made him feel heavy in the pit of his stomach. It wasn't until he was terminally ill that he began to speak openly about the event that had altered and wounded him. "They made me hide this." His throat cancer had weakened his voice, but his words were more distinct than before. "Back then, you weren't allowed to break character, even off screen, especially if that character sold $1 billion in merchandise. I loved Batman, and I still do. But that suit taught me that dreams can come true and still break you." It was once a dream of Val Kilmer's to play Batman. It nearly cost him Val Kilmer, but he didn't know that then. His impact remained significant regardless of that news. It widened the gap, because behind the hero and the mask was a man who paid a price that few people noticed. Although the suit drew on Kilmer's emotional investment in the role, he still faced a more formidable challenge, defeating the hero. Considering the legendary performance by Michael Keaton, Val Kilmer experienced a distinct turning point. Kilmer wasn't always interested in playing the role of Batman, but he was under a lot of pressure to fulfill fans' expectations and live up to Keaton's legacy. Since Keaton's portrayal of the Caped Crusader was so narratively consistent, fans were understandably protective of him. However, Kilmer was aware that this would be challenging. He later admitted that he was under a lot of pressure to succeed Keaton, particularly given the series' devoted fan base and their incessant need for more installments. Pressure was exerted from all directions. Kilmer had always sought out roles that required a great deal of nuance and complexity. Directors Joel Schumacher and Val Kilmer had to strike a balance between the serious Batman and the light-hearted, exciting Batman that they envisioned for the film. It didn't take long for Kilmer to realize that this was going to be difficult. Jim Carrey, Tommy Lee Jones, and Nicole Kidman, who played opposite him, appeared to relish the film's exaggerated tone, which both frightened and inspired him. However, Kilmer felt constrained by his Batman costume. Kilmer believed that Batman's inner complexity shouldn't be diminished by the film's bright and explosive nature, so he nevertheless managed to give the part depth. The public had mixed reactions to Kilmer's portrayal of Batman in Batman Forever, but they did find the film to be more light-hearted than its predecessors. His softer side was appreciated by some, while others preferred the darker, tougher Batman they knew and loved. The public's perception of Val Kilmer diminished with the passage of time. It was a peaceful pursuit of tranquility, not an obstinate effort to conceal. His departure from the mundane life of Hollywood was motivated by more than just a desire for independence. He had to return to his authentic self. Kilmer's passion for playing remained constant. Regardless, he persisted in performing, albeit on occasion he returned to his theatrical roots where he could be authentic without donning a superhero costume. Although he recounted numerous anecdotes, no one ever learned the truth about his stint in the Batsuit. Much later in life, while still battling throat cancer, Kilmer began to speak openly about the event that had altered and scarred him. The role that should have made him famous and cemented his place among Hollywood's greats instead made him feel like a vessel, a living symbol whose humanity had been gradually taken away with each frame captured. He lamented, "I played Batman in a suit, but I never played Bruce Wayne. I never got to show who he really was. All that mattered was the suit, the brand. That's all the world wanted to see, and in the end, I lost myself in it." Those who had previously held Kilmer in high esteem began to view him differently as his health deteriorated. To them, he was more than simply the man in the cape and cowl. He was also someone who had suffered for his fame. The news had leaked. They had lost faith in him as the superhero they once held in high esteem. He was a frail man, ailing from the effects of his choices and life's burdens. The candor with which Kilmer described his experiences allowed many to identify. Discussing the challenges of playing Batman only served to enhance his already stellar reputation. Neon lights and the roar of Batmobiles weren't the only things that marked this layer. What made it unique was his humanity. The mask-wearing figure was more than a plot device. Kilmer was an authentic, forthright human being. He continued to make an impression despite his diminished vocal capacity. Following his admission that playing Batman was painful, discussions centered on the negative aspects of fame, the strain it puts on actors, and the high cost of famous roles. Many viewers, having grown up with Kilmer's Batman, began to view him in a new light. They started to view him as someone who had risked his health for a role that demanded more of him than he could provide, rather than the courageous hero who fought against Gotham's villains. It was a road to redemption, though Kilmer's journey was not without its hardships. He was well aware of the price that fame, stardom, and becoming a symbol entailed. On the other hand, he had uncovered aspects of his character that the average person would never know. Batman was an oxymoron now. In spite of the pain, he had matured into a man who could speak his mind. In his final years, Val Kilmer had to cope with his health issues, the lessons he had learned as Batman, and his own mortality. It was obvious, though, that his influence extended far beyond the films in which he appeared. Everything revolved around his forthrightness and the reality he unearthed in the stillness. It was all about facing his inner demons head-on, in addition to the demands of the outside world. The influence of Kilmer would linger, similar to that of Batman. However, in the end, it had nothing to do with the bat on his chest. Kids begged for Batman toys as they dashed out of theaters, and the man in the suit wore a vulnerability that belied his strength as he shared his story and declared, "This is who I really am." Tickets were sold out in theaters. Joel Schumacher, the film's director, and Warner Brothers were both pleased with the film's campy, neon-colored aesthetic. Suddenly, Val Kilmer was donning the world's most recognizable superhero costume. However, Kilmer did not perceive any accomplishment on his part. He ought to have felt content and joyful, achieving greatness, leaving an indelible mark, and fulfilling the childhood fantasy of every boy who picked up a comic book. That was his life's work. But night after night he would stare into the hotel mirror and try to figure out why he felt so isolated. For some reason, he felt as though it had stripped him of all he had, even though it had offered him so much. Aside from the suit's weight, there were other factors. The thing that kept him awake at night was the shift in his thoughts. While playing Batman had always been a symbol of power, mystery, and control for Kilmer, the role made him feel trapped, powerless, and unnoticed. He was not in the mood to be heroic. The room was filled with molded rubber and studio standards, so he felt like a man yelling in the middle of nowhere. He was quietly disappearing, but Batman was his public persona. The world wasn't always a sunny place. Much stress was present. The public had high hopes that he would satisfy Michael Keaton's legions of fans while also appeasing a profit-driven studio. There was meticulous attention to detail, and every smile was rehearsed. Even admitting that the outfit or the role made him feel awful would have gotten him labeled as tough. He remained silent once more. Being silent, though, does cost something. The thing that Kilmer had desired previously started to make him dislike it. Instead of relishing in the prospect of becoming the superhero, he began to dread the daily shoots. His strength was unaffected by the suit. His beloved art was snatched away. It was forbidden to be open, spontaneous, or ready to act. All of the words and phrases were concealed. Instead of focusing on his movements, the scenes were designed to showcase his outfit. Instead of being told to be Batman, they only told him to look like him. As an expert would, he persisted. However, he departed Gotham City after the show ended with a heavy heart. The idea of a sequel titled Batman and Robin started floating around. The company wanted him back. On the other hand, Kilmer had broken in, and the inside was serene and finished. He remained calm. He wasn't angry. He was exhausted. After that, he shocked the Hollywood elite with his decision. His desire to return was strong. A neat and vague excuse that hid the truth was the official reason given to the press, which was a clash of schedules. Under his breath, Kilmer had made a solemn vow to himself. He would never again let his appearance define him. However, not in the sense that anybody ever hoped fame would transform them. Rather, it had altered him in ways that were more sinister and unsettling. From that point on, he subtly hinted through his looks. He had previously stated, "I didn't quit Batman." For years he kept quiet about it, saying only, "Batman quit me." He then moved on to other endeavors, some of which were successful and others of which were not. He rediscovers his passion for the stage and narrating stories in his unique style. The shadow of the Batsuit, however, remained. Even at airports, where he would still be called Batman, it accompanied him to interviews and fan mail. A pleasant smile would grace his face, as usual he did. But the part had made him feel heavy in the pit of his stomach. As he neared the end of his life and contemplated his mortality, he began to speak for the first time in years. In an effort to be forthright and break free of the illusion, he refrained from saying anything negative. He explained, "They made me hide this." He continued, "Back then, you couldn't break character, not even off-screen, especially if that character sold $1 billion worth of merchandise." Despite his weak voice caused by throat cancer, his words were stronger than ever. "I loved Batman, and I still do, but that suit, it showed me that even when your dreams come true, they can still shatter you." Val Kilmer wanted to be Batman once. Little did he know that it would almost cost him Val Kilmer. That news didn't diminish his impact, but it made it deeper. Behind the hero and the mask, there was a man who paid a price that not many people saw. Now Kilmer had another problem to solve. This one was more complicated. he had to defeat the celebrity. The suit certainly played on his personal connection to the part. Val Kilmer found himself in a unique situation, following in the footsteps of Michael Keaton's illustrious performance as Batman in the first two films. Kilmer's path to wearing the cape and hood wasn't one he set out to take. However, he was under a lot of pressure to not only live up to Keaton's reputation, but also to please fans who had grown close to the previous Batman. Many people liked Keaton as Batman because he played the role in darker and more gloomy ways in Batman 1999 and Batman Returns 1992. His image of the Caped Crusader was so good that it was almost like a story, and his fans were very protective of it. When Kilmer was chosen to play Batman, fans had high hopes, and there was a big chance that fans who thought Keaton was essential would not like him. Kilmer knew this was going to be hard, though. Later, he said that he felt a lot of pressure to replace Keaton, especially since a lot of fans of the series were looking. Keaton's Batman was praised for showing how deeply troubled and reflective the Dark Knight was. Kilmer had to balance that memory with the fun and exciting tone that director Joel Schumacher had chosen for Batman Forever. Kilmer found out quickly that this wasn't going to be easy, especially since everyone on set had high hopes for his performance. Kilmer was both scared and moved by the other stars he worked with, especially Jim Carrey, Tommy Lee Jones, and Nicole Kidman. Jones and Carrey were both famous for playing characters that were bigger than life. As the Riddler and Two-Face, they brought an almost ridiculous energy to their parts. On the other hand, Kilmer was limited by the Batman outfit, which was famously stiff and uncomfortable, making him feel caged. His co-stars, on the other hand, seemed to enjoy how over-the-top the movie was. Without having to worry about how their outfits fit, Kilmer said that compared to theirs, his part often felt like it needed less action and more introspection and darkness. Even so, Kilmer found a way to make the part more interesting. He thought that the bright and exciting nature of the movie shouldn't take away from how complicated Batman's mind was. Kilmer's Bruce Wayne/Batman was more fragile than Keaton's. He had to deal with family issues, forgiveness, and growing as a person. Some people liked how he played the part with modesty, while others thought it wasn't as serious as other actors had played the part. People thought that Batman Forever was lighter than the movies that came before it, but they had mixed feelings about Kilmer's performance as Batman. Others hoped he had gone back to the rough, dark Batman they were used to, while others liked how he made the character more emotional. Actually, Kilmer's performance was an attempt to meet the needs of fans while also following the series' changing direction. Val Kilmer's life took a lot of surprising turns over time, and each one took him farther away from the Batman character that had once defined his career. After the troubled experience on Batman Forever, Kilmer slowly faded from public view. This wasn't a rebellious attempt to hide, but a quiet search for peace. Things had changed. There were new players in the Batsuit, and each one gave Gotham's Dark Knight a unique look. However, Kilmer's portrayal of the character remained memorable, and many regarded it as a pivotal moment in the Batman film franchise. Regardless of his fans' approval, Kilmer refused to continue living up to that image. He escaped the pressures of Hollywood not merely for the sake of independence, but because he needed to rediscover his authentic self. Despite this, Kilmer continued to perform occasionally, returning to his roots in theater where he could be himself without the constraints of a superhero suit. He worked on projects that allowed him to embody characters that were truly his, characters that he could truly own. However, no matter what he did, the truth about his time in the Batsuit remained hidden. It was something he had buried deep. It wasn't until much later in life, while still battling throat cancer, that Kilmer began to openly discuss the event that had changed and scarred him. Reflecting on the years gave him the focus he needed to finally tell the truth. He no longer worried about Warner Brothers or Batman's image. His attention had shifted to getting better and realizing how much that part had hurt him. His health had deteriorated, and as his voice got worse, it became increasingly difficult for him to conceal his true feelings. In interviews and autobiographies, however, I was never Bruce Wayne. I was unable to reveal his true nature. The suit and its brand were the only things that counted. That's all the world wanted to see, and in the end, I lost myself in it. This was the essence of his heartbreak. The role that was supposed to make him famous and solidify his place among Hollywood's greats instead made him feel like a mere vessel, a mannequin for an icon, a living symbol whose humanity had been gradually stripped away with each recorded frame. As his health deteriorated, fans who had once admired Kilmer began to perceive him differently. They no longer saw him as the unbeatable Batman they had admired, but as someone who had paid a price for that reputation. The truth had come out, and they had stopped seeing him as such a hero. He was a man who was weak, sick, and struggling with the weight of his life and the decisions he had made. Many people could relate to Kilmer's honesty about what he went through. He added a deeper layer to his reputation by talking about how hard it was for him to be Batman. This layer wasn't just marked by the flash of neon lights or the buzz of Batmobiles. It was defined by how human he was. Behind the mask was a real person, not just a character. He was honest and open. Kilmer's impact was still strong, even though his voice got quieter. People talked about the bad side of fame, the stress on actors, and the price of famous parts after he talked about how much it hurt to play Batman. Fans, many of whom had grown up with Kilmer's Batman, started to see him differently. They no longer saw him as the strong man who stood up to Gotham's bad guys, but as someone who had put his own health at risk to play a part that required more than he could give. Plus, Kilmer's trip was not only hard, but it was also a path of redemption. He understood the price of fame, stardom, and being turned into a symbol, but he had also learned things about himself that few could. He was no longer Batman, and despite everything, he had grown up and found the strength to tell the truth, no matter how painful it was. Val Kilmer had to deal with his health problems, the lessons he had learned as Batman, and the last few years of his life. But one thing was clear, his impact was bigger than the movies he played. It was about the honesty he brought to the surface, the truth he discovered in silence, and having the guts to confront both the world's demands and his own inner demons. Kilmer's impact would endure, much like Batman's, but it wasn't about the bat on his chest in the end. It was. Post your comments below and tell us what Kilmer's story teaches us about the price actors pay to play the parts we admire. Until then, take care.